Hey guys, I hope you all are well. I haven't made a video since my conversation with David Deutsch, which was pretty awesome, and that's kind of a hard act to follow, and so I didn't feel like making another video immediately after that. And it's been a crazy month, right? Coronavirus is spreading around the world, and lots of people are in quarantine or some kind of lockdown. I'm pretty lucky to be in Singapore, where we have a pretty good um, situation, right? So I'm not like in home quarantine or anything like that. I can go to the mall to buy groceries. I'm not worried about catching the virus. I mean, I don't go out much to begin with, and I work from home, right? I do consulting work online, and I write, and I'm pretty much isolated, self isolated to begin with, but it's not, it's not something I specifically think about. But I feel like I ought to make today's video about isolation because I have experience with it. I would say I'm pretty good at it, and yeah. So let's talk about that. Um, yeah. So I while I am probably technically an extrovert, I do value having time to myself, and I do value being alone and even isolated for pretty long periods of time. I believe, so I served a couple of years in the Singapore Armed Forces, which every guy does, right? And I have a lot of experience just spending a lot of time by myself, and so I am pretty bummed out that I'm not going to be able to be traveling. So I had planned a trip to New York in late April that I was really looking forward to, but that's almost definitely not going to happen. So that's pretty upsetting. But in the grand scheme of things, like it's I'm healthy, my wife is healthy, my parents are all right, and it's not a big price to pay on our part to help slow the spread and stuff like that. So that is what it is, and we have to make the most of what we have, and life goes on, right? However it does. And so yeah, I thought I would spend some time thinking about my experience with isolation. So I believe that I could comfortably be isolated, or for a year, 2 years, 3 years maybe, if I had to. And I think a big part of why I can feel comfortable saying that is because I have experienced some version of it. So let me kind of explain, I guess. When I was a teenager, when I was living with my family, I was never so, like, my family would tell you that I am kind of a reclusive kid in the context of the household. Like, I would be reading a book, or I would be on my phone, or I would be on the computer, right? My parents were always grilling me for being on the computer, which on retrospect was one of the best things I did in my life, which was to get online, build a body of work, of writing, make friends online around the world. And to this day, I am deeply, deeply grateful for my network of friends around the world, because they keep me, I want to say, grounded. They keep me connected. And the way that I really remember experiencing this is, so every couple of years or so, I have military reservists, meaning I have to go back to a military camp and shave and cut my hair and get into my uniform. And like for a week or for 2 weeks, I have to do soldierly stuff, which I can't get into specifics about. But it's basically what we're basically doing in military reservists in the Singapore Armed Forces is we're basically idling the engine. So nobody who goes for reservists is seriously expected to be kind of like combat ready, right? There's no imminent threat to our national sovereignty, and so it's not like we need guys to be like super fit and super combat ready. But But the thinking, as I see it, is kind of like, if there were to be a threat, like a year from now, 5 years from now, like whenever, right? Like if there is a credible threat, like military wise, you don't want to have to wait until there are foreign troops at your borders, and then you're like, oh shit, what do we do, right? So you have this process that's like idling the engine of the military apparatus, and part of our national duty as Singaporean citizens, as men, is that we have to be prepared, or there's like levels of readiness, and you can go from a lower level of readiness to a higher level of readiness more easily than from not knowing what to do to trying to get people together overnight, right? So I even have like a WhatsApp group of my fellow soldiers who so we can get activated. We have these like mob manning periods. I have one in a couple of weeks where they might text you and say, hey, we need you to show up tomorrow or today or in 3 hours or whatever. Like you do know in advance when it's kind of probably going to happen, and it's they try to be kind about it. They would make it on a weekend. Like usually it's like a Saturday morning, I think, Saturday afternoon, and so they give you some advance notice. But the point is that someone presses a button or someone makes a call, and then thousands of guys show up at the military bases with their equipment, and it's a mobilization exercise, right? It's not for anything. It's not in response to anything. It's just having the capability as a nation to do that if you had to, right? And anyway, I went into more detail about it. That then is necessary, but so we have to do and so we have these weekly things, these week-long or fortnight-long training sessions every other year or so. And a couple of years ago, so I remember maybe like 4 years ago when I first had to go for it, I had like no friends on Twitter at the time, and so I would be so bored. I found ways to entertain myself in between. So we would have like training sessions, and we would have to like physical exercise and stuff like that, equipment exercises, and then we just have a lot of downtime. And I used to sit around and either try to read a book or write in my notes, but it did feel like socially isolating in some way. I mean, I am surrounded by my fellow soldiers who I chat with to some degree, but we're casual friends, but we're not on the same like nerdy wavelength. Like we're not like soulmates, right? We're just buddies. We're friendly with each other. It's like like pub friends kind of, right? Like guys I would have a drink with, but you don't really have a lot to say to each other beyond, hey, how's life, how's your kid, how's your wife, like that kind of stuff. That's kind of the wavelength that we're at. But now, like, I have all of it feels like I have these really close friends on Twitter, and some of them are in my YouTube comments these days, which is great. And I can count on being able to, at any point in my life, any time in the day, pick up my phone and just press home to unlock, right? And then I'm on Twitter already, and I have notifications, and I have replies, and I have people asking me questions, and I have people mentioning me, and it just feels so I feel so connected. So even when I'm socially isolated or socially distant, I feel like I'm a part of something that's going on. I feel like I'm a part of conversations. I feel like I'm a part of just a social process of some kind, and that is very gratifying, for me. I don't know if it would be gratifying for everybody, and I do think that there's a skill set involved in knowing how to make friends with strangers via text, right? Like not everybody's wired for that, but it can be trained. And if you're here watching this video, you're probably adjacent, so I'm not like some famous guy. I'm not some, like if you're watching this, you must have already known of me in some way, and you must be drawn to this sort of idea discussing paradigm, right? And yeah, so I imagine that this tool, the idea of this tool would work for you, right? So you could be writing blog posts, you could be, having email correspondences with people. And this was something I think I have always wanted to be a part of. I think I've mentioned versions of this in other videos before this about just being a man of letters, right? Being like even if you read about people like Ben Franklin or just, Montaigne, like people from hundreds of years ago who, they would write letters to their friends or to other people that they felt were notable or interesting. And these letters would take probably, I'm guessing, weeks to arrive. And so they would write pages and pages of correspondence and it would go back and forth. And it's just intellectual life. It's intellectually stimulating, right? And I think that if you have that intellectual, or if I have it, or if people like me have it, so I'm assuming you're like me if you're watching this video, probably. People like us, if we can be a part of some sort of intellectual tradition, some sort of idea exchange, and it can be superficial shit as well sometimes, right? It doesn't need to be, grand social theories and philosophy and stuff like that. It can be, current affairs stuff. It can be politics even, right? Just anything, just the meeting of minds. It does not have to take place in person. There is a beautiful, beautiful experience when you meet these friends in real life. So, one of the greatest experiences of my life was meeting some of my long-running internet friends in person when I flew to California in last year in May, right? And it felt like some of these people that I was meeting for the first time, it felt like we knew each other all our lives, and I felt more intimately connected to some of them than I have even my own family, right? And it makes me sad that I won't be able to do that in April this year, which I was planning to do in New York. But again, that just, we have to do what we can with what we have, right? And I guess what else I wanted to talk about was maybe more about my experiences of isolation and just dealing with these things. So, okay, when I was a teenager, I started out on this earlier and I went off in a tangent. But again, when I was a teenager, I used to play in a band. That was a source of meaning for me. And I used to hang out with other musicians. I used to go to gigs and, check out other bands and talk to the audience, talk to friends, talk to fans, right? Like fans. It's a small scene, and there's people who play, and there's people who show up to watch, and a lot of the people who show up to watch, they are also interested in music, and they're very often also going to become bandmates, so they become your contemporaries. It's all really nice. But there's also, there's politics, and it's really petty politics because it's such a small scene, right? And everyone's kind of squabbling over a very small pie that we should be focusing on expanding. I digress again. And I used to hang out with like friends who lived near me. So I grew up in the east of Singapore, and I had all my friends from school and like friends of friends and all those people, they're all from around there. So I had a friend, Damien. I'm still friends with him. He's like my Telegram chat buddy. We still meet at least once a year, sometimes several times a year. Or when I visit my parents, sometimes I meet him afterwards because he stays pretty near my parents do. Stays pretty near where my parents do. And so I had this group of guys that I was meeting practically every day, almost every other day. Like it would be a short walk from my house, like a half an hour, no, like a 10-minute walk. And we would spend hours just hanging out, talking about life, talking about books, movies, games. It was an interesting time. I could spend hours talking about that experience, which was, we spent so much time together, and on retrospect, I would say that we might have spent too much time together. Like, we might have, and too much is it's easy to say on retrospect, I guess, but like if I could hang out with those group of guys right now, if I could go back in time, I would challenge them to get out of their comfort zones and to seek new people and new environments and try to just see more of the world, right? When you're young and you have time and you have nothing to lose, you're not paying your bills yet, right? You're living with your family and stuff. Like, I would challenge those guys to expand their concept of reality, meet new people, make new friends, see new things, because it gets harder. It kind of gets a bit harder to do when you get older, or there's compounding returns to doing these things earlier if you can. But I mean, you do it when you do it, right? Life goes the way it goes. It's not a linear path anyway. But yeah, I spent a lot of time with those guys, and they were a source of comfort for me, I guess. And it was my third place away from home and away from school. And when we were all the same age, and we were kind of like, our military services overlapped, right? So like I mean, one guy would be done first, and then I would be done, and then the third guy would be done. But it's like, there are periods of time, and then when you're done in the military service, some of you go to school afterwards, like university. Some of you start getting jobs. Whatever the case, we were just hanging out all the time, and we would witness each other's transitions through life, right? And that was just an intense social warmth. And I can see that this is something that a lot of people have in some way in their lives. Like, even now, if I go downstairs to the coffee shop, I mean, right now it's like 3 a.m, so there's nobody there. But if I go in the morning or in the afternoon, you'll see groups of old people hanging out. And, I remember when I went to India with my parents, and it's the same thing everywhere in the world, right? Like, groups of people hang out with their friends or their peers, their neighbors, and they just have some kind of social environment. It could be drinks with friends after work, it could colleagues after work, it could be church. You have like this weekly group of people that you meet. And what happens is people use other people as a sort of social my brain says panopticon, which is kind of dark and bleak. But a panopticon is a kind of prison, right, where the people in the center, the guards have a way of seeing everybody. Or the prisoners can't tell if the guard can see them. So it's opticon seeing, pan everything, right? So the guards can theoretically see everybody all the time, or appear to be. It's like having security cameras on you all the time. You don't know if anyone's watching, but you feel like you're being watched, right? And people want to be seen, and people want to see each other, and they want to be seen by each other, but they want to do it in a way that is consensual, or that's in a way that they can feel comfortable about. So we want to be seen by people who love us and care about us and judge us like be fair to us, and aren't kind of judging us punitively. Like, and it's like, think about all the cliche stories about people who there's this very strong trope of like a auntie, or just this judgmental church lady, right? Like this older woman who, and men do the same thing, right? But the stereotype is that it's the women who do it, where just kind of the gossip, who's like paying attention to everybody else's lives, and like, oh, did you see what so and so's daughter is doing? Did you know that this is happening? Like that kind of very there's this very unpleasant vibe about those people, right? About the idea of those people, and these people do exist. Like these very judgmental social. What would you even call them? What are they? What are these people? What role are these people playing? They're this kind of it's like this social police, right? This social, like they don't have the law, but they have like customs, or they use like social norms and whatever to they're like micro tyrants in a way, like they're kind of using their judgment, and they're like artists of social. They like, people worry that other people will judge them negatively. Like they use these micro ostracizations and judgment and praise, and like, oh, did you know so and so's child was arrested for shoplifting, and then, oh, shame on that. Like you might not literally say shame on them, but like, you get it. It's like this news feed, like this person in the community. There should be I'm sure there's like a word for it that I'm not thinking of right now, but like, these people, I guess in difficult times, like maybe in a pandemic, I guess, like these very well connected people could be very useful in the sense that they function as like information brokers, right? They like, somebody needs help, somebody can help, right? This person can be connected with that person, like that's useful. But like in peacetime or in stable times, they seem to create drama, and they seem to enjoy presiding over the drama, and scoring points, and like weighing people's moral worth relatively, right? And how did I even get here? It just seems to be the nature of the social animal, right? Of it happens at work, right? It happens with like people playing office politics, and do you know what that person said about this person? Blah blah blah. There was some of that in my friend group as well. I think it's an inevitable part of socializing, and I think there were times where it got unhealthy, and it's probably because we were at a stage in our lives where we didn't have much going on yet. Like we were soldiers, or we were students, and we didn't, like, the group that we were in was I guess, looking back now, that the drama of a small group that is entirely dependent on itself, and each individual is very much dependent on that group for context, for meaning, for all of those things. The whatever drama happens in that group becomes inflated in it feels bigger than it is, particularly because you don't have sources of meaning outside of the group, right? And a thing that happened for me when I've talked about this in my depression video, for example. I said that depression is about the collapse of meaning. And when I got married, I moved from the east of Singapore to the north of Singapore. So like I left my friend group in a very physical and literal way. Like it used to be that, we would meet up impromptu, we would text each other and like, hey, want to have drinks after dinner right now? Like, just if you're in the mood. And it's kind of super laid back, chill. We didn't make plans, right? At that age, you don't really need to make plans. And so it's very free and easy. And when I moved, I no longer had the opportunity to do that. And so that's one way in which I left the group. And the other way is that I got married and I got a job, like when people were still either going to school or, they're still single. And so even if I was living where I was, I imagine that, when I would go and hang out with those guys, I would have felt very distant, very kind of, I would be the odd one out. I would start to be the guy who doesn't quite fit in. And I think even in Wait But Why, one of these articles about friendship, he talks about like, just like when you have friends who are like along the same path, and then someone goes on a different path, and then now this person's kind of still kind of partying, and this person has kids, and it's just, this person's like, hey, you want to get more drinks? Like, no, dude, I got kids. Like, oh, okay. Like it's, you can no longer, it's not that it's not that you're not, it's not that you no longer feel fondly towards each other, but you no longer have the thing that bonded you, that was kind of convenient and easy as a vehicle for your intertwining, right? So the ways in which you're intertwined diminish, and so you can still hang out from time to time, but the nature of your relationship is forever different, right? And that happened for me with my friends, and I felt like I lost my friends in a way, and I wouldn't have said that to them. That would have been a slightly strange thing to say, and what could they have done about it anyway? I wouldn't have wanted them to change who they were to try and accommodate me, right? Because they are them and I am me. We are all each individuals trying to go about our lives, right? And it's just there's a bit of a grieving process for that transition, and then you have to find new sources of meaning. And same for when I started working and I kind of had to abandon the internet blogosphere, the political blogosphere that I had gotten attached to, which I talked about as well. And so I just felt very isolated, socially, psychologically, intellectually. Like I felt like I was in a very, I mean, like I could go out, right? I did go out every weekday to go to work. So every morning I would, get on the train, which is a miserable commute to work. And then after work, most of the time I would just go home to my wife. And I'm married and I have a spouse, and that's great, right? I recommend it if you can find someone that you can fight well with and have happy disagreements with and laugh with. But so I wonder, I imagine this video might be very different if I was single, right? So I think singlehood and being partnered are very different. And, I always do have the comfort of knowing that my wife is waiting at home for me. And it's also, it's so this is one of those things that's difficult to say in text because it's hard to convey tone. I love my wife to hell and back, right? I love her so much. She's my favorite person in the world. And a marriage can be a lonely place. Like I would say that to like if I have two very close friends who are, in a relationship for a long time and they're very happy and they're going to get married, like one of the things that I will tell them is that a marriage can be a lonely place. It sounds strange, right? Like, you till death do us part, and my favorite person in the world, and you share everything, and you're open with each other, and you tell each other everything, and like, no, you don't. Right? Like you might not be dishonest with each other, but there are areas, so a marriage is something that's like super intimate, right? It's super, like psychologically intimate, not just physically. Like physical intimacy is the easiest part of a relationship, I would say. I mean, doing the things, right? Everyone knows how to do that. Like kids know how to do it. Teenagers know how to do that, right? You have hormone, whatever. Like touching each other is, I mean, some people might struggle with, and when people struggle with physical intimacy, I believe that the problem tends to be upstream, and it's a psychological intimacy problem that manifests as physical intimacy problems. Does that make sense? So like being in the same space as your spouse, physically, emotionally, psychologically, and I mean, you may not be in the same emotional mental state, but you're in the same space, not just physically, but like, you are in the confine or the context of the marriage. If either of you is not conveying all of your emotional state with the other person, if you're not in sync, you each start to sense that there are things that the other person is not sharing with you entirely, and then there's this kind of lag. I've written about this in on my blog post about relationships. I'll link it in the comments. But like it's very challenging to talk about because it's so nuanced, and if you're hearing any of this and hearing, oh, that person has like marital problems and they're just not talking, like, no, it's not that simple. And maybe think about it in the context of like family. I think siblings don't really have this problem because you are both, I mean, you might, I don't know, right? I'm not super close to my siblings, but I think in a parent-child relationship, there definitely is that dynamic where you might love each other a lot, but there's just this gap that happens somehow. And right, it happens because there are things that are difficult to talk about, that you don't feel ready to talk about, and you're each worried about what the other person will think. Maybe you might not even be actively worried. You might not have the thought in your head, I'm worried about what the other person will think if I tell them what I think or what I'm concerned about. But there is an aversion, so like in Less Wrong, they talk about feels, like UGH feels, where you don't even think about the thing that's giving you grief because the thing that gives you grief is uncomfortable, and so you flinch away from the thought, that the uncomfortable thought that you don't even think. So the idea of the thought, or like just that you hear, you see what I'm saying? You're trying to, you are already there are things in your life that you're avoiding without realizing that you're avoiding them, because you're avoiding them. it's a mind fuck when you try to figure out what these things are, because you don't even think about them, because thinking about it is unpleasant. And so there is this thing in your life that you are going around all the time. You never touch it. You go around it all the time, and you never look at it. You just go around it all the time. You never look at it, and you never address it, and you don't know what it is, but that it's there. It's the thing that you avoid, or the non-thing. Like, it's just a thing that you avoid. And in an intimate relationship with a spouse, it's astoundingly easy for these things to develop in the most intimate spaces between the two of you. And, like, this is why, like, marriages fail. Like, isn't it fucking crazy that marriages fail? Like, we should, as a species, sit down and think about the fact that marriages fail. Like what? Like a quarter of them fail? I think some people estimate up to half, but it's complicated because, like, serial monogamists kind of mess up the data. But let's just say a quarter of marriages fail. Like, a marriage is when two people decide that they love each other so much and they care about each other so much, and that they trust each other and they believe in each other, and they are each other's favorite person, right? Effectively. And so they get married, and then a quarter of them go on to hate. They go on to decide that it's not working out, right? And for a lot of people, their ex-spouse becomes the person that they hate the most in life. Like just think about that. Like, the person that you love the most, the person that you loved the most, becomes the person that you hate the most. Like, it's never some random person that you just bump into the street and you're like, oh, this is the person I hate the most. No, it's like, and it's a function of intimacy, because the closer you get to somebody, the more they can hurt you. By definition, the more painfully they can disappoint you, the more horrendously they can let you down. Like, if you never get close to anybody, that can never happen. But then you never get close to anybody, which is, you fail by default in a sense, right? And why do I bring that up? I'm talking about isolation. That's the theme, right? And the closest relationships can be isolating. Like, I don't know if I've done justice to the idea of it, and maybe we'll have some interesting comments to respond to. But yes, and I'm not trying to make a point about marriage specifically, but I think it's true for just very intimate relationships that, I would say, like, again, like, I have people who I consider, there are people in my life who I once considered to be extremely close friends, who I don't talk to anymore because they don't want to talk to me anymore. And I take responsibility for that. I was not a great friend when I was a teenager. And so I have these people who are kind of like my ex-best friends, right? It's sad. And like, when our relationships were not working out, it was a lonely place to be. It was an isolating place to be. I'm writing a whole novel about this because it's just so complex, right? And at the same time, if you're traveling and you meet a stranger in a foreign land at an airport, and you can just blurt out things to them that you can't say to your closest friends, right? Just imagine this set where a person asks a stranger for a cigarette, and then asks, so how's life? And she responds, I don't think I love my husband anymore. Like, you can say that to a stranger. You would be uncertain about saying that to your mom, right? To your past, like your friends at church. Like, there are things that, like, these are hazardous thoughts, right? Or hazardous utterances. You can't unsay them, right? And yeah, I guess in a marriage, for example, the potential damage of things that you cannot unsay means that you start to. It becomes very easy to start to censor your thoughts, and you might not even consciously realize that you're doing it, but you've started to censor your thoughts about your spouse, about yourself in the presence of your spouse. You start to preempt what might upset them, what might frustrate them, and or what they might respond negatively to, and then or like what might cost you down the line, and so you don't say those things, and those things, the not saying of those things have consequences, right? And those consequences are not good. So it's very important in a marriage, for example, for you to constantly or periodically have difficult conversations with your spouse where you ask each other what you're thinking and what you're afraid of, what you're nervous about, what you worry the other person may not approve of. And if it's very difficult to have those conversations when you're tired from work, you're stressed, you're worried about stuff, your tensions are high, you don't have energy, you're stressed. And I imagine if you have kids, it's way harder or worse, right? It is literally, I would say, possibly the hardest thing in the world, as evidenced by the fact that so many people fail at it. There's almost nothing more important to get good at than the ability to have honest conversations with other people. And it's hard, right? And if you can't do it, you feel isolated. That is my... that was not exactly where I intended to go with this video. We're already at 36 minutes, and I guess I wanted to talk more about like the experience. So in how do you survive, right? So that was my experience, right? I was isolated from my friends. I felt isolated in the context of my marriage with my lovely wife, who I love very much. I felt isolated even a little bit at work because so my workplace my job was my primary source of meaning. Well, I really loved my ex-boss. I really loved him very much, and I wanted to make him proud. Like, he was the first man that I really admired, and he took a chance on me when he didn't have to. He challenged me and mentored me and made me a better person. And I really looked up to him, and I really wanted to please him, basically, right? Like, by being a good employee. And I was on I never felt like I was good enough and it's not, he wasn't telling me, hey, you're not good enough. Like, he just had high standards. He would say good job or nice when things are doing well. And if things are not doing well, he'd be like, oh, what's going on? Like, he wouldn't even be like, why is this shitty? He would never say things are shitty. He would just say, what's going on? What are the targets that you set that you thought were reasonable? Did you think that was a reasonable target? Why? Why or not? Why not? How are you going to meet it? What's your plan? What do you think is going... Why did you think that the previous thing you tried didn't work out? How can you do it better? He's like a fucking therapist. He's amazing. And... but like, again, because he meant so much to me. He almost meant too much to me, right? Like, I was aware at the time that I was kind of idolizing him a little bit, and like, it's not like I was blindly idolizing him, but like, I was aware of my feelings, and at the time my awareness of my feelings did not change the fact that the situation was what it was, which is that, now in retrospect, having left my job and having had a couple of years to grow and develop on my own, like, I now realize that I could have been a better employee if I was less attached to my circumstances. If I could get over my kind of impulse to my neediness, right? So I was needy, and I was needy for approval. I was needy for validation, and my neediness got in the way of me doing what would have been my best work. I did pretty good fucking work. I was great. I was pretty good at my job. I achieved some pretty great results that I'm proud of. And maybe that was the best I could have done at the time, right? Like I was 23, 24, I was a kid, I was a noob at life, and I've gotten better at it since. And yeah, I realized that I would have been better if I was less needy. How do you become less needy? That might be a topic for another video. But so because I was so needy, I didn't look for other jobs, because that felt like some kind of betrayal in some way. And if I could go back in time, I would tell myself, hey, even if you love your boss, like, look for other jobs anyway. Like kind of get a sense of what you're worth on the market. Get a sense of what the other options are. Like, don't entrap yourself in this cocoon. And I don't know if that's good advice for everybody, but it would have been what I needed, right? So I would have felt less isolated if I was less needy. And the way to be less needy, I guess, like, that's another 1 hour video, but in a nutshell, I guess, first of all, just be aware of the fact that you're needy and realize that, neediness is inescapable to some degree, but, like, I don't know. I have to think about that one. I feel like awareness is a first step, but there's more to be done afterwards. I know that I must have done the work since, but it's not work. I wasn't super conscious about it. But, we are at 40 minutes. Let's try and keep this to 50 minutes, right? I would say the number one thing that I did for myself in my times of isolation was journaling. So I have, and you can go and look this up if you want. I have this writing project called 1,000 Word Vomits, where I just journal. I just write. It wasn't entirely private. I mean, so it's available publicly for people who want to see it. But like, I wasn't publicizing it. I wasn't sharing it deliberately. And now I have, like, I think a couple of hundred people who follow me on that Twitter account. So I have a separate Twitter account for my 1,000 Word Vomits. I haven't written one in a while since I've been making these videos, but journaling kept me sane. And I guess my one line, like, I'm gonna try and use this last few minutes to try and encapsulate everything. And that the pain of isolation is, in the absence of other people. So people function as a kind of social echo, if that makes sense. And then, so an echo chamber in a way, right? Like, and they help with your echolocation, your, like, social echolocation. Like, you figure out who you are, you figure out what you're about, you figure out where you stand, what you think, what you want, where you're going. Are you going too fast, too slow? Are you too aggressive, too passive? To, like, whatever it is. Like, meeting other people helps you know where you are and how you how you stand, what you're about. You can, by surrounding yourself with other people, you can bounce off of them to get a sense of who you are. And when those people are not in your life, when you're isolated, right? Whether you are in a military camp or you are at home alone, like, without other people to bounce off of, you start to go a little bit stir crazy. And I guess how I think about it was, I used journaling as a way of kind of almost simulating other people, where all the other people are different versions of myself. So, like, I have described sometimes that I think of myself as a federation of selves, like many, many different visas, right? So even now, I could have a conversation. I could go up. So now that I have this, and you've seen me record these videos, right? So I could go back and watch my other videos. Like, if I'm alone, and let's say my wife's not at home and I'm stuck doing nothing, I could go and watch my old videos, and I could question them. I could be like, what are you saying here? Like, why are you saying that? I could pay close attention to myself and have a conversation with myself, right? Like, ask questions. And so I guess that's my advice. Like, when I look back at how I coped with isolation, in, like, whether it's like a literal isolation, when I was like, when I was doing guard duty on an offshore island as a military guy, Then I would sometimes in the moment distract myself by like playing music. Like I would, so I would have my rifle, right? I would just be tapping rhythms of my rifle, and that's one way to pass the time. But you can still kind of go mad. But like the way that I coped with 2 years of military service was that I made it a game, kind of. I made little experiments, like let's try working out for 3 months. Let's try reading 10 books in a month, and then like having something to do and having a reason to do it allows like it's about having something to devote yourself to, in a sense. Like, there's this quote that's like was it Pascal maybe, who said that like one of all of the bad things in the world come from the fact that people can't sit in a room by themselves. And you can meditate for some time, right? I think I could meditate for an hour, maybe a couple of hours if I was intense about it. But eventually you have thoughts, right? And I don't believe in trying to live a thought-free life, right? Like you don't want to be controlled by your thoughts, but you don't want to squash them, right? Thoughts that arise can be interesting. So you want to know which of your thoughts are interesting and which are fun and which are cool, right? And then, kind of play with your thoughts. Like in isolation, make a list of whatever's on your mind, figure out whatever's interesting. When you have the internet now, you can like go on bunny trails and keep track of your bunny trails. Like if you go on bunny trails every day, clicking around Wikipedia, and then like a month later, you've been clicking around Wikipedia for a month and you have nothing to show for it, that's kind of depressing. But you can keep track of your bunny trails, and that is what I do on Twitter a lot of the time, right? Like I go on a bunny trail, I keep track of what I'm learning, I keep track of what I'm curious about, and other people get to see it as I do it, and then they get to comment, they share relevant things with me. It becomes a game. And as long as you're playing, you're having fun, then it's gonna be alright. That has been my experience. As long as I can be playful, as long as I can laugh, and if you're in isolation and you feel like you're in prison, like then it's not very funny, but it can be very sad. But I remember my whole life felt like a jail sentence when I was about 25, and just having a mortgage, being married, having a job, like just the prospect of having to do work, right? That was, at the time, it felt like work was always gonna feel like work. Work was always gonna feel like obligations and deadlines and disappointing people and letting people down just to put food on the table, like and a roof over your head. That felt like a jail sentence. When that happens, the challenge, I mean, you should face it, right? I wouldn't say you should be in denial about it. You should face it. You should feel the horror and the pain in that. And then you should breathe, and you should try to see that while the big picture is a box, right? Like this is the box that you're in. I'm trying to touch the box in the frames of the video, right? While you're in this box and you can't get out of this box, you can play inside it, and there is freedom inside the constraint that you're in. And if you do interesting things and fun things within the prison that you're in, right? Because you're still in the prison. But if you can find a way to have some fun in the prison of existence, while your life feels like a box, it actually isn't. It feels like it. It really feels like it, right? And circumstances may dictate that it is like it. But there is a crack in everything, and that's how the light gets in, right? It's a lyric by Leonard Cohen. Nothing stays the same forever. Nothing. And everything eventually changes. Everything that feels permanent isn't. Nothing is permanent. Everything eventually cracks. and everything eventually changes, right? And so if you're having fun in prison, that fun will, first of all, it will be fun for its own sake, and that is something to cherish while you're in where you are. But the cool thing that I have learned, and maybe this doesn't generalize for everybody, but like the fun that you have, the joy that you have, the laughter that you have in the constraints that, within the constraints of the context that you're in, will be useful to you when you eventually get to break out, when you eventually get to go out of the prison, out of the frame, right? So I was writing, for me, right? That was a thing that I was doing within the constraints of my frame, and that writing set me free. Not in the moment as well. First of all, in the moment, even if nobody else cared. And even right now when I'm making this video, I am enjoying this process of making this video because I am feeling, I didn't plan what this video was going to be about. I didn't know what I was going to say. I don't know how many people are going to make it to the 51-minute mark on this video, right? Probably 5 people max. Who's going to sit down and watch a 50-minute video by some random guy? But I don't care. I don't care if nobody sees this, because I made this. I made this for me, and I made this for a younger version of myself who may someday see this. And there is freedom in this, and I know that there is freedom. I know from experience writing that there is freedom in this process, that this process is going to take me somewhere that I can't even imagine. And that is exciting. That is interesting. That is me in this isolated context breaking free. I wish you freedom and joy, and thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. Done.